That's nice and self-explanatory. And this is just a little bit where a lady, she's 35 and she lives on her own, and she wakes up one day really early in the morning and she sees a shape of a man standing at the foot of her bed. Abby fixed the man in her gaze. Her fingers grasped around on her bedside table, searching for anything that resembled a weapon, and grabbed hold of the first solid object they found. It was an IKEA lamp with little silver feet. She held it out in front of her, a foot in each hand. "What do you want?" she asked. "You must come with me," said the man, "for I am death." Abby looked at the man who was standing by her dirty clothes hamper. He was tall, with short dark hair and the face of an accountant. He wore black trousers and a striped blue and white shirt that had a vague polyester sheen to it, like the kind you don't have to iron. "You're not Death," she said. "I'm a Death," said the man. He handed Abby his business card. It read, "Keith Jackson, Certified Reaper, Grade C." "Death's name is Keith," said Abby. "And?" said Keith. Abby apologised. Keith shrugged. "Whatever, I've got a schedule to keep to, so let's get on with this." He reached into his trouser pocket and took out a small scroll. It was no longer or wider than a cigarette, but as he unravelled it, it seemed to go on and on till his arms were at full extension and there was still paper coiled at either end. "Abigail Stokes," he read, "born 1104, September the 12th, 1974. Died 7:15 a.m, November the 8th, 2007. Daughter of Helen Clare Stokes and Martin Clive Stokes. You were a bonny baby, though you suffered from severe cradle cap." "How do you know that?" said Abby in a whisper. "It's in your file," said Keith. He went on. "Severe cradle cap, which meant that your hair grew up like a tiny mohawk." Abby looked at the card in her hand. The words on it morphed like mercury and reformed into the shape of a grimacing skull. An icy shiver ran down her spine. "I'm going to die," she said. Keith stopped reading. He looked at Abby from over the scroll. "You're already dead," he said. "See," and he began reading again. "Abigail Stokes, born 11:04 a.m, September the 12th, 1974, died 7:15 a.m, November the 8th. "Wait," said Abby. "I'm sorry, I can't," said Keith. "You're in the system now." "No," said Abby. "The time's wrong. You said 7:15. It's only 6:15. She pointed at the glowing red numbers that burned out from her alarm clock. Keith followed her finger and looked at his own watch. "Shit," he said. "What does that mean?" said Abby. "It means that daylight savings has shafted me," said Keith. "But I'm alive," said Abby. "Yes," said Keith, "you're alive. For one more hour, you are alive." Abby breathed a short sigh of relief and then burst into tears. Finding out she had an hour left to live didn't feel anything like Abby thought it would, because when you play games of what would you do if you had an hour left to live, you always think of grand and dramatic things to do, like gamble your life savings on a racehorse, or fly an aeroplane into the sea. But when it came to the crunch, Abby's mind just went completely blank. Sitting in her pyjamas on the end of her bed, she was unable to think of anything other than time ticking away before her eyes in big red seconds. Keith had excused himself and gone off to the kitchen. It turned out he was uncomfortable around grief. Abby sat alone in her bedroom, looking at all the familiar junk she'd gathered and tried to imagine never seeing it again. Her eyes moved from the hillock of clothes that had piled up over a week of laziness to her laptops ticking over in sleep mode, and up to the collage of photographs that had kept her company for years. Her face smiled out from them, as did the faces of her siblings, her parents and her friends, and she thought about how they'd go on smiling into her empty room once she'd gone. Keith came back with a couple of mugs. "I made you some coffee," he said. "I'm going to need something a bit stronger than that," said Abby. "Oh, you don't want to get into the habit of drinking before breakfast," said Keith. "It'll kill you." Abby looked up at him, terrified. "Does it?" she asked. "No," said Keith. "I'm sorry, I was just trying to lighten the mood. Here." He pulled a hip flask from his back pocket, poured a measure into one of the mugs and handed it to Abby. She smiled weakly and took a sip. "What does get me?" she asked. "I can't tell you," said Keith. "I'm sorry. I wish I could." He smiled sympathetically. "So, what happens now?" asked Abby. "We wait," said Keith. "Should I call someone?" "If you like." "You think that's a bad idea?" "Honestly?" Abby nodded. "What's the point?" Keith swallowed a mouthful of coffee and grimaced. Your milk's off.
Charlie Cottrell. Thank you everyone. We're going to put the music back on. Can we just have another massive round of applause? Enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you for coming and supporting.
Lazy Gramophone.